there's no end point, and the end point is full and total liberation. And until then, we keep moving.
Welcome to Blueprints of Disruption. I'm your host, Jessa McLean. Those last sounds you just heard were that of Palestinian children making their way back into the north parts of Gaza following a 42-day ceasefire agreement. You also heard Fatima Saleh, an Edmonton-based Palestinian activist who will be joined by Anna Lippman from Independent Jewish Voices for our next episode. We called both of these formidable people back into our studio to react to that ceasefire announcement, but also to reflect back on how far the movement has come. We take time to remember some of the gains made and the victories won, but not without losing sight of the work ahead. Even after all this time, we're still finding new ways to end the occupation, hold politicians accountable, and solidify our support for the people of Gaza. To that end, our call to action for this episode is in the show notes, where we've put a bunch of ways you can help out right now, including a string of GoFundMes and local initiatives. So please take a moment to check that out. Now let's get to reintroducing our guests.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Fatima Saleh. I am currently on Treaty 6 territory here in Amiskwichi again, traditional lands of Nehewak, Dene-Solene, Nakota, Soto, and Métis. And I'm happy to be with you.
Hey everyone, I'm Anna Lippman, tuning in from Toronto, the traditional home of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, and very happy to be with you all here.
I very much appreciate your time, especially considering it's a bit of an emotional one. It's a bit complicated. And we are just 2 days post the beginning of the ceasefire. And I wanted to check in with some people that have spent hundreds of days, 460 plus days and more, but fiercely advocating for Palestine, because these are the people I first thought of when the announcement of the ceasefire came. It obviously came with trepidation, but I was hopeful for my comrades here and others that are really in the thick of the fight. So we're going to check in with Anna and with Fatima, and then we're going to talk about the ceasefire and a little bit, but mostly we're going to take stock and look back a little bit on where we've come as a movement and where we can go. Hopefully this will help people process this moment as well, because I'm having trouble. Fatima, what did you think when you knew the ceasefire was very close?
Honestly, there was such a mix of emotions. First and foremost, relief. Just relief that there's, the execution order has somewhat been lifted off of this incredibly dense population that has the same population density as New York City. And the fact that there's not going to be, hopefully, inshallah, carpet bombs happening and these this targeting of healthcare systems and everything going on there, it feels like a stay of execution, at least for now. And I say that really intentionally because a ceasefire, and you might have seen me tweet this, a ceasefire doesn't mean that this is the end. It means that for right now, the blade has been lifted from the neck, and there is cause for joy in that, because at the beginning of all of this, Israel put out very clear and Netanyahu put out very clear objectives that he wanted to accomplish in Gaza. And for 15 months, the core of the resistance was to just not be erased, to not be pushed completely off the map, to not be completely decimated. And, genocide did not start on October 7th. Genocide escalated on October 7th. And, genocide is not going to end with this specific ceasefire. We've had ceasefires before. It's going to pause or slow down. And until we all really get into that mindset that we can't take our feet off the gas in structures here in Empire where we live, and making sure that we're educating and drawing attention to what's happening in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, but also in places where olive groves are being torched, where people are still being displaced and forcibly dispossessed of their homes in Palestine. It was a relief mixed with anxiety because this staged plan, it's not very clear what's happening. It doesn't give a lot of details about how the third stage specifically is going to go, and how that's going to, what Gaza is going to look like. And so yeah, relief, and also a lot of trepidation about what's coming next.
All valid. Complete. And at Anna, for folks who can't see Anna, just nodding her head emphatically. And I'm still going to go to you, even though you seem to agree with everything Fatima had to say. But I think everyone also had like that personal moment of, where were you and what did it feel like? I mean, there was like, we knew they were in talks for a ceasefire. This wasn't news, but there seemed to be a moment there where it was sure, and we saw celebrations, and that felt a little different than anything we'd experienced in a long time. How did you feel?
Part of me felt just surreal, like the realization, the joy that like people will stop dying for at least 42 days was just amazing. And then also, trying to kind of stop myself from getting too happy, just knowing what Israel does during a ceasefire, how fragile this ceasefire is, how much there is still to go, right? And so I think especially kind of talking to the folks that I've been supporting in Gaza, like when the ceasefire was announced, when they sent me a voicemail, the first voicemail message I got was like, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah. I've never been so happy. And it was just so amazing to hear, right? But of course, over the next days, we start thinking like, how are we going to get, this family of 10 out? How are we going to get them money to rebuild their house if they stay? How are we going to get them medical attention? Will they be eating tomorrow as they're still alive? Like there's still, all the conditions are still there, right? And so, I said the day it was announced, like we celebrate today and we get to work tomorrow, right? Because the joy that is being felt not only in Gaza, but when the prisoners were released, like 90 people reunited with their families, that's nothing small. We have to celebrate that and recognize that. But like Fatima said, like the work doesn't end at a ceasefire. Like this is literally the bare minimum after screaming for 15 months, right? And so this is the floor and not the ceiling, right?
And you've maintained that. Many people have maintained that from the beginning of the calls for a ceasefire, right? Because maybe it was Fatima, I'll edit it out if I'm wrong. Part of your tweet was when talking about what the ceasefire isn't, it wasn't an end to the occupation or the siege or thousands of prisoners returning to their families. Sorry, Palestinian captives returning to their families. And that was always the work from the very beginning, before it escalated into this refocusing on a ceasefire and an arms embargo, which I imagine is still part of the battle.
Yeah, for sure. I want to touch a little bit on what Anna said about celebrations. I think it's so important to celebrate the wins along the way, and the fact that, like I said, Netanyahu had a specific idea of what was going to happen in Gaza, and the fact that he could not get there is a cause for celebration. The resistance won, and the resistance to just be able to live, to survive, that is a win. That is something we must celebrate 100%. And when I saw, journalists taking off their flak jackets for the first time and swapping them out for a keffiyeh. It is so emotional to watch this. You know what I mean? Like, I think of Abu Bakr, a 22-year-old journalist who he wants to report on sports, and he has now become a journalist for a genocide. And the fact that he can maybe, and I've seen his tweets, I've corresponded with him, and the fact that he's just so excited that this might be a reprieve. Yes, we need to celebrate that. But I want to draw it back to these lands on Turtle Island. We celebrate here because our families, again, it's a stay of execution. But we have to remember that we effectively in Canada, I don't feel like we got enough done. I don't feel like we got much done. Like you said, there is still an arms embargo that needs to be achieved on these lands. And this government absolutely refuses to hear the screams of their people from coast to coast to coast that have been out in the streets every single week for 15 months. It's absolutely ridiculous that people who are disrupting Chrystia Freeland's, announcement to run for prime minister, are being shot down as if, they don't have a right to free speech. So it's just the fact we just have to remember that imperialism is here too, and to educate ourselves and our own communities specifically on how it's connected here. They're never going to acknowledge it because they know that it's occurring here as well. They're not going to say, oh yeah, Palestine needs to be free. Like, they keep pushing these talking points about a two-state solution. You don't even recognize one of the states. How are you pushing this talking point that makes absolutely no sense? It's just to evade the actual issue at hand, the fact that you continue to arm this genocidal entity and lie about it, because we know the numbers say 28.5 million in 2023 or whatever it was, but that's what's regulated. What's going out that's unregulated? It's really concerning to me that we don't have that transparency from this government. We don't know how much arms have really gone through, how much components have really gone through, and how much they're actually standing to make from it. It's really concerning.
Am I wrong to think that we were possibly already at a point of transition in the movement, like a need to reflect back and maybe shift tactics of sorts? Or because the way you described, like, keep our foot on that pedal, but any turns? Can we look back and see how we've shifted tactically?
It's important to recognize that where we are today in January 2025 is so different than where we were January 2022, right? Like, the amount of knowledge that the average person now has on what is going on in Palestine has vastly changed around the globe and here in Canada and the United States, right? And so I think it's really important that we don't turn back from this moment. Like, there can't be any going back to a time where people say, oh, I don't know what's happening, I am not aware, right? Like, this is the moment where we have to double down in this at least 42 days of, I like what you said, like this stay of execution, right? And this is when we really need to be pushing for things like a two-way arms embargo, actual government sanctions on Israel, right? And the concrete steps that Canada needs to take to commit to justice and the basic international relations that they have with pretty much every other country in the world. Canada has put sanctions on most war criminal countries, right? And we need to continue to challenge this Palestine exception, right? It's no longer acceptable knowing what we know now.
Yeah. What we were able to talk about online, in person, as we advocate with different groups, organizations, politicians, whatever it may be, is very different from October 6th to now. It is incredibly just a different story. I remember just educating 2 years ago on Kafi and what it meant, and what that the fact that it's not a terrorist symbol, because this is the actual history behind it, and explaining to people, no, there is a place called Palestine. No, I'm not from Pakistan. It's a different thing. And now, like Anna said, nobody can claim to not know. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unhear what you've heard. This has been live streamed to the world for the last 15 months. And I think it's really interesting to look at specifically resistance in Palestine, and how perception to that resistance may have changed for a lot of people. And I think that I was just saying this to somebody the other day. I find it so interesting that a couple of years ago, you could not say Hamas to anybody because nobody understood it. Nobody knew it. Nobody understood what resistance means. What, like, decolonization is not going to be pretty. And now you can talk about it in a way to explain, like, what did you expect to happen? What did you expect to happen in the sense of, Gaza was unlivable at 2020. There was not enough water. There was not enough food. Never mind what it looks like now. But resistance is the only way out of this. There's no, somebody said to me, the only way out of this is international law. And I said,
no, they didn't. Not now. They can't say that now.
No, I mean, and that's the whole point is it's never, it's going to be, that has a place. You know what I mean? The ICJ rulings, it has a place, sure. But the only thing that's going to stop a population from being completely eradicated is resistance to that, resistance to colonialism, resistance to imperialism. What else do you expect? And it's one of the Thawabit, the Palestinian Thawabit, is the right to armed resistance. Because, if somebody is carpet bombing you, how do you not resist that? So I think it's then till now, and where we've come in the last 15 months, is the narrative has completely shifted. It's been before where you had to, claw your way into a conversation on Palestine. And now it's very different because it has been live streamed to the world. And I don't think Israel was banking on how much perception of the Israeli state has changed.
In terms of like knowledge, and people have seen and heard a lot. That goes for politicians too, right? You're at a different starting point with the powerful. You no longer need, or at least feel the need or obligation to book a meeting and explain the situation in Palestine and, trauma dump on them in order to get them to come along. It's like there's a certain expectation now on politicians and a threshold, and people are not going to take any shit on that front. I think like the public in general has come along. Just a pause there for the people who disrupted Freeland's launch. I cannot explain the joy that you've brought me in the past 2 days. I have a personal beef with that MP. It's a boring story, but watching her whole political career flounder because of those folks that infiltrated her launch in that gym, that school gym, which looked pathetic to begin with. Those seemingly small actions, which were well coordinated, folks. It's a lot of organizers listening and activists who are listening. That staged interruption. I mean, the images that people were able to pull out of there. I hope that haunts politicians for a long, long time. Even when they think we've forgotten about it, or they can move on to a leadership race, that we're not still going to be pestering them at every turn. So, I still have such smiles because it's just, not that I have a front runner for the Liberals. I'm not cheering for them in any way, but just thank you.
You could just tell that she was holding back that I'm speaking line.
Like the Kamala's line?
Yeah. And I think it's really important to note that the whole world really, whether it's like fully true or not, or there's different elements that came into play, but I think the whole world understands that when Kamala did not back an arms embargo, it truly affected her campaign. And we have to know that they're looking at that. They're seeing that. People like Chrystia Freeland and others, they understand that that is going to be a thing. How that plays out politically within the landscape of Canada, I don't know. But you have to know that they've seen it. Our movement is so much more powerful. It's so much more powerful. It has a voice. And it's always had a voice, I think, but specifically on these lands. How much the narrative has shifted and it's moved forward in a way that we can now organize from power.
And I think never before in Canada has Palestine been a voting issue, you know? So it's just incredible.
Globally, too, right? More and more countries in the past year have recognized Palestine. Why Ireland wasn't already on that list? Like, as I'm going through it, it's, Spain, Norway, Jamaica, Slovenia, Trinidad and Tobago, Bahamas, and Barbados. Just a shout out for that. But then Ireland, I was like, why are they just coming around? But either way, it's part of that larger signal that the whole global perspective on apartheid, on the occupation, and just the masks are falling off everywhere. I mean, that does make our job easier as disruptors, right? To know our enemies more closely. Because, Fatima, you mentioned we're able to say Hamas. We're able to talk about armed resistance and other things. But we're also confronted with an unprecedented level of vitriol. Things that would have made people just look like maniacal and foolish are now almost like the commonplace in the comments. And I think that's like mask off, right? You have even liberal supporters just saying, oh, I hope Israel gets all the land. And you're just like, okay, well, it's very effective to know where your enemies lie. Were you surprised in the past year by the callousness of our politicians? Did you think, they could be swayed at the beginning?
No, I wasn't surprised at all. I think if you asked any Palestinian, you're going to get the same answer. It's the bare minimum. The bar is on the floor. But anytime you do get any like modicum of support, you're like, that's kind of shocking. That's never happened before. So it's like a double-edged sword where you're like, okay, this is obviously something you should be supporting because it's just so clear. But at the same time, because it's never happened before where we've had true advocates, we're absolutely like thrilled. As much as they're not even doing as much as they should be, it's just, I think from my perspective, we've never had that before. Like I'm 40. I've never seen it before. I've never seen
a watermelon pin in the legislature.
Yeah, a non-Arab, non-Muslim like Heather McPherson, who, is amazing. Shout out to her. But at the same time, there's so much work to be done. Like I call her all the time and I'm like, listen, this is how I don't like how this was framed, or I don't like that. You know what I mean? We're having those conversations and we never had that path before to actually sit and have these conversations. But I think it's not just that we've never had the path before. It's activists specifically speaking to politicians, where it's not organizations, it's not groups that are worried about whether or not it's their charitable status or whatever it might be. Like real people on the ground who are saying, this is what we see. We're also your constituents. This is what more people are seeing. And then having this groundswell of support through these rallies. It sucks that we've had to have them for this long. It sucks for the reason for it. But if there's no silver lining to genocide, but if there is any positive to come out of this, it's the connections that have been made. And the fact that, we all understand as we look at a pro-Palestine rally, it doesn't look like one thing. It doesn't look like Muslim Arabs. There's so many different people there, every ethnicity, every race, every gender, every sexual orientation, everybody is there. And it's connecting everybody. And then also making sure that as we're connecting people, as we were having these conversations, to understand Free Palestine is not just about Palestine. It really is a global anti-imperial, anti-empire movement. So we have to connect it to Haiti, to Sudan, to all of the other, to Kashmir, to all of everything else that's Congo, what's going on in the world. I think that's what makes these politicians and empire fearful, is they see what could be through these sustained protests and through the sustained activism. If Palestine is free, who's next? Like we're saying it And we're truly thinking, like, who is next? In what world is imperialism going to be okay, or colonization of any people going to be okay? Because you're going to see this pushback and this absolute, like, we're not going to take it anymore. It's not going to happen.
Anna, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and I think goes back to what Fatima was saying before we started recording, right? Like imperialism and colonialism makes great bedfellows, right? And when Canada sees what's happening to its bestie Israel, it makes them nervous, right? Because we have a lot of reckoning to do with our own history of genocide, of imperialism, of colonialism, right? I think politicians understand that this is a global movement and we're coming for them next, right? I think in a lot of ways they're scared. You know, I have the terrible, terrible luck of having my MP be Chrystia Freeland, right? And God knows she has never met with a pro Palestine constituent, right? But we've come to her. She's seen us in the street. She doesn't go to her office. We came to the Boys and Girls Club, right? Like, so they feel the pressure, right? And you know, for folks who can't be moved from their humanity and morality, you know, may they be moved by their political aspirations and the demands of their constituents, you know?
Or may they fall?
Or may they fall.
A lot of them we could just do without totally. It's a filter, right? Who needs to do all that work bringing those folks along just to save their political careers, just for them to likely repeat this down the road? But I think I asked the audience, our audience, if they were to be able to talk to Palestinian Solidarity activists following the ceasefire, what would they ask them? And mostly focused on upcoming elections. It's like that moment in time where people feel like an extra bit of political power, or not, and they want to know what to do with it. Is their allies, or, you know, should they be more focused on holding folks accountable? Both. How are you folks looking at these regime changes, right? There's a liberal leadership race, if that matters to anybody. It's a point of interjection, as we've seen with Freeland's disruption. It's possibly a federal election. A lot of our audience is in Ontario, and there's a possible election there provincially. So any advice for folks on how to utilize campaign times or election times as a pressure point?
Yeah. I'm gonna refer to what Nora Arakat said when she was in Edmonton, and I got a very brief chance to talk to her before her talk, but she she really honed in on an aspect that I have been kind of moving forward with since that conversation. And she said it's time to organize from power. It's really time to see where we can move forward and how we can move forward and continue to organize from power. So no matter what, we're going to be principled. We're going to stick with the Thawabit. We're going to, you know what I mean? We're going to make sure that those principles move forward. But at the same time, somebody like me knows that Palestine or anybody's freedom is not coming through voting blocks. It's not coming through international law. It's not coming through these structures that are deeply rooted in white supremacy. At the same time, we need to organize from power. We have, like you said, a voice. Now, the Palestinian Solidarity Movement is a voting issue. All of it needs to be brought forward. And what happened at Chrystia Freeland's office needs to continue to happen, in my opinion. We need to continue to take those hard questions to the people in power, or the people who seek power, and make sure that they know that we're going to be there and we're going to hold them to account. We're going to hold their feet to the fire and make sure they understand that their policy decisions are going to have ramifications. It's not just a fringe group of Arab Palestinians and anti-Zionist Jews. We have such wider support now that we can actually, it feels like for the first time, organize from power and really kind of bring forward a voice and say, we are not going to accept this from you. And unless you do ABC, you're not getting our vote. This is where we're at right now when it comes to these institutions. To be like, I don't really have much faith in any liberal leadership, and I would probably disrupt any liberal event that was happening here because you are complicit in the genocide of my people. And at the same time, this is what we want.
Yeah, you don't have to ask nicely. There's no rule that says you have to ask nicely. And I think it'd be impossible to not have Palestine and our response to it be an election issue if it haunts them on the campaign trail. If it's, the backdrop to all of their pressers, it's not going to come from asking nicely or try to meet with these folks. And I think I'm grateful that folks have come around to that point. I think at this point, we're better equipped. You mentioned having better connections with more people and far more defiant in our approach to getting what we want. And yeah, the reaffirmation of resistance. I mean, just today, the video circulating of resistance fighters lined up, and one of the journalists in Gaza is saying, see, Benjamin Netanyahu said he killed all these people. He destroyed the resistance. Here they are here, and everyone is just sharing this and liking this. And that would have been completely unheard of before October 7th. And even in the days after, like, so much work has been done to get to that point, and to not lose a step because of October 7th, not to be able to have to pull back that statement that armed resistance is still, in fact, a right, but maybe not under a ceasefire, right? That's when it becomes a little more complicated. But we're not here to unpack that. I'm not springing that on you. But I did mention before we started hitting record, I was going to ask you about, we normally do Canadian content, but it is hard to ignore the elephant in the room. And that's not very nice to elephants. Donald Trump was interviewed in the Oval Office yesterday, which was a horrible day for a lot of activists, still processing this, what's happening here. But someone was pressing him on Gaza. I'd like to know who that was. Like, kudos. They tried to get answers out of him. Can I play the clip for you? It's hard to hear, honestly. Just kind of a warning. He's very cold, as the man is. But, he's asked about the ceasefire holding, and then he's asked about what you talked about, Fatima, in terms of what will Gaza look like.
President, that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza and conclude the 3 phases of this deal.
I'm not confident. That's not our war, it's their war, but I'm not confident, but I think they're very weakened on the other side.
Do you support the 2-state?
Gaza, boy, I looked at a picture of Gaza. Gaza is like a massive demolition site. That place it's really got to be rebuilt in a different way.
Do you plan to help rebuilding Gaza?
I might. Gaza is interesting. It's a phenomenal location. On the sea, the best weather. Everything's good. It's like some beautiful things could be done with it, but it's very interesting. But some fantastic things could be done with Gaza.
How do you see the future in governance for Gaza?
Well, it depends. I can't imagine you could have, you certainly can't have the people that were there. Most of them are dead.
Sorry if you hadn't heard that. I don't know. It still makes me really angry listening to that. He's speaking about Gaza like a prospective development site for vacation homes. It's hard not to even, people who can go watch the video, I'll link it in the show notes. Even the way he's just pondering, it seems, it's so nonchalant too. Yeah, what could we do with that demolition site now that it's empty? And, this goes back to the very first calls of activists, Palestinian Solidarity Activists everywhere, that this was all about taking land. It was never about clearing Hamas or retribution or hostages. It was always, always, always about acquiring more of Palestine and turning it into Mar-a-Lago, is what it sounds like now.
It really does sound like exactly what we've been talking about is settler colonialism. It's not about just erasing a people, but also always expanding always gaining more land, always gaining more resources. And we know Gaza's geopolitical location, like, and the actual location of Gaza is so important to this imperial core. And so from the beginning, we've been saying, and all Palestinians, I think, know that this is not about Hamas. Hamas was in 1987, and it's been happening since before that. So it's not about Hamas. It's not about October 7th. It's always been about the land. It's always been about acquiring more and more and more, because it's never enough for the settler colony. It's never enough. Same with these lands. It's never enough. There's always trying to take more and more and more. And you just hear in his comments the complete dehumanization of Palestinians, because he does not even speak about the 2 million people that are there. He does not even acknowledge that there is a group of people living on this land. He's looking at it, just like the far right in Israel does. Like they were going on those boat tours, if you remember. They were like taking boat tours to see, like, this is going to be your new home. We're going to build a settlement here, and this is what it's going to look like. And look at these gorgeous beaches. And it's just about the fact that it's that entitlement to think that it's all yours. And where are these people going to go? And there was talk a few months ago, I can't remember how many months ago, about we're going to create 4 camps in the Golan Heights or wherever it was in Egypt, 4 camps, and there's going to be 500,000 people per camp, and that way Gaza will be fully empty. And there's talking about this like it's a completely normal thing. And it is for imperial. Exactly. It is normal for them. This is the norm. So as indigenous people to the land, you're like, what do you mean you're going to just come in? It always reminds me of the El Kurt family and Jacob. I always come back to that, where I'm like, for him, it's just a foregone conclusion. An imperialist and colonialist, it's just a foregone conclusion. At some point, this is going to happen. And then you have the people that are there going, what do you mean? You can't just take this. And that's at the core of this. So it doesn't matter to these structures how many people get slaughtered, in what way they get slaughtered, if they're children, the fact that Gaza is 50% under the age of 18 years old. None of these statistics matter. They're going to continue to pull these things because they've done it before. And we would be remiss not to talk about what's happening right now in the West Bank, and the fact that the day after a ceasefire, Israel decides to name a new operation in the West Bank, Operation Iron Wall, and name terrorists. We have to get control of the terrorism that's happening in the West Bank. And I have an activist friend here of mine who was originally born and raised in Palestine, lives here, and his cousin was in the video with the child that was sniped in the West Bank in Jenin. And, he was celebrating yesterday and very excited about this ceasefire. And it just shifts because, if everybody's eyes are off of Gaza right now because of this ceasefire, then we have to understand that it's all of Palestine that needs to, there needs to be a cessation to occupation. There needs to be a cessation to apartheid. We need to get to an idea where people can live freely on this land with equal rights. And until empire comes to that, which I don't think they ever will, we have to, you can't, with the ceasefire specifically, and talking about how, resistance groups, they need to cease as well. Does that not include the West Bank then? Because if Netanyahu is doing it and doing a ceasefire, which they haven't, they've already violated it in Gaza specifically, in Rafah, what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. Did you just put it out because the inauguration? Did you just put it out there and sign these things to get people to celebrate? People in Gaza 100% deserve to celebrate. But outside, in the outside world, I hear conversations about, okay, well, what's next? What do you mean, what's next? We're still in the same fight. We haven't moved on to another phase. We're all still in the same place we were yesterday, because nothing has effectively ended when you think about Palestine as a whole, which we have to, because it's a Zionist narrative to continue to separate the West Bank from Gaza and to continue to separate Palestinians that have been forcibly displaced out of the land from Palestinians in the land. We have to look at it as one entity, because it's never going to be free until it's all free. And I know that just sounds like I'm spouting off these pretty lines, but it's so true. It's so true that, it stops in one spot and it picks up in another. You have 90 prisoners released, or sorry, 90 captives released, and some of whom are as young as 12 years old. But at the same time, there's administrative detention that's still taking in the same amount, if not more, without charge or trial for God knows how many months. So, like, are we presenting a full narrative of what is happening? Because how many more are going to be? And even the ones that have been released, those were all re-abducted. A lot of them originally were re-abducted and now they're getting released. So inshallah, they don't get re-abducted. Inshallah, this is actually a step forward. But I can't help as a Palestinian to be like, okay, you can't make deals with another entity that has never kept its word and is never to be trusted. It's hard. It's hard. This moment is really difficult.
Yeah, because I'm going through my head. I don't want to ask this question, but is there not then danger in celebrating? That sounds so awful, but you have allies on the sidelines, right, who maybe don't fully understand the complexities of a ceasefire and whatnot. And if they see celebrating, will they come back? Will they still feel the urgency that we need them to have? But you don't want to deny anybody that breath, or the acknowledgement that the situation on the ground in Gaza, it's night and day compared to the carpet bombing and those just huge bombs going off all the time. So yeah, it's so complicated because there has to be balance though. Folks needed that breath, even if it was just to, okay, gotta keep going. That deep breath, that second wind, third or fourth wind at this point, right?
Yeah. I just feel like this is where education happens. I know a lot of people in the movement now that have just learned about it and are just starting. And I feel like this is part of that process. Two things can be true at the same time. We can celebrate and still be working. People in Gaza deserve to celebrate at the same time as they're going back to the north and they're finding bodies on the ground, decomposed bodies on the ground. They're finding their homes on the floor. Two things can be true at once. I know that they are happy that there is a ceasefire. And I also know that they are completely scrambling for, like Anna said, food. What are we doing next? How are we rebuilding? How are we going to get school? Like the first thing is going to be getting some sort of actual healthcare system going and not just field hospitals. And the second thing is going to be trying to get schools back. We know that Gaza's population is so entrenched in knowledge and they want to learn, and they are some of the most educated people on earth. I think their PhD, something like they have the highest concentration of doctors or PhDs in the world. And, a huge loss was Dr. Rafat al-Arid, alayhi yarhamu. It's just a huge loss because, as much as he did in that context of educating Gaza, of educating the world about Gaza, it's like, it's difficult. So I think that people, to answer your question, allies that are looking at this from the outside, I think this is education time to understand that, yeah, this happens. We've seen ceasefires before. We've seen them violated before. We've seen the continuation of occupation and more land grabs and more ethnic cleansing through ceasefires. And like what people have said it multiple times, there was a ceasefire on October 6th, and then you had articles and articles and articles of people being killed in the West Bank or people being killed in Gaza or water it's just a structure. And it's like, you have to understand that it doesn't end with this win. There's no end point, and the end point is full and total liberation. And until then, we keep moving.
To our U.S. comrades who are facing a regime change there and wondering what they should be doing, but also you mentioned supporting folks in Gaza, like directly. Perhaps there's a way for listeners to be able to do that on top of, we've talked about pressuring politicians and attending rallies and disrupting things, but what haven't we talked about in terms of ways to support people in Gaza?
There is a lot of, misplaced hubris within colonial and white supremacist structures. And people like Trump and people like Netanyahu, they talk as if they're so certain that, what they're going to do is going to succeed, right? And we've seen, these statements over the past 15 months about what they're going to accomplish in Gaza. against what they have accomplished, which is awful and terrible, but also far from what they claimed, right? And so I think it's important to recognize that, you know, resistance takes so many forms, and there are so many ways that the people of Palestine are resisting, and all of them are so beautiful. And even one of those ways is taking joy, right? Is taking these moments to celebrate. And I don't think Israelis hate anything more than seeing joy in Palestinian lives, which is why they literally went to the families before the exchange and told them, like, no celebrations, right? Um, but, you know, there's so many ways that people in Palestine continue to resist, whether it's through education, whether it's through this rebuilding, whether it's through just like, you know, getting to watch, report on, play football, you know? And so that, I think, is the right and the will of Palestinians, and it's not on allies to question that or take that away, right? And it also doesn't mean that we as allies have the opportunity or the same kind of you know, social location identity, that we can take a break when Palestinians in Gaza do, right? Because our situation is very different. Our role here is to continue to support that resistance, whether it be, you know, children throwing rocks, or whether it be little girls becoming doctors, right? And so I will plug, you know, there's so many GoFundMe's out right now. Every single Gazan pretty much has a GoFundMe, right? And people have been donating, but that need is still there, right? And even as the bombs stop, like, people, if they can, are going back to their homes to collect their rubble. And so there needs to be rebuilding. People want to continue their education. People want to receive the healthcare that they have been deprived of for 15 months, right? And so the need is so great. And even on, you know, Al Jazeera this morning, I'm watching aid trucks get in, and people just run for this aid, and still it's not enough for the massive population of Gaza, right? If everyone listening donated $10, $20 to like 3 GoFundMe's, that material support is really what's going to make the difference in people's immediate lives right now. And more than just, you know, being able to buy water, being able to buy, you know, maybe some flour that doesn't have bugs in it, knowing that people still care, that people are still with you, that people are still watching. This is what, you know, Palestinians in Palestine tell me all the time, right? We want to know that people are with us. And so it's important to not let our messages of support, our financial support, our activism wane. We have to keep it up, because the people of Gaza need it more than ever right now, right? As they have that ability to breathe and deal with everything they've been holding for the past 15 months. Like, we as the allied global community, you know, myself as a white Jewish woman, like, this is our responsibility to hold and support the people that have risked so much to show the world what true Samud means, you know?
Fatima, do you want to add anything in terms of moments of resistance or just avenues that you want to give a shout out to in the way that Anna did, folks doing good work that you can encourage?
Yeah, everything Anna said, 100%. And also,
Ditto.
Yeah. And also, here in Edmonton, we've been doing a campaign called EPCOR Delivers Genocide. And EPCOR is our water provider here in Edmonton. They're the only water provider in Edmonton. And they have sourced these AMI meters from a company called the ARAD Group that is on stolen land in the West Bank. And so if people want to learn more about that, our team, incredible people, not me specifically, I'm part of the team, but I don't do as much as they do. They're incredible. So shout out to the team at EPCOR Delivers Genocide. They have submitted a report to the UN with Francesca Albanese. And if you want to read the report, if you want to learn more about this, it's epcordeliversgenocide.ca. But basically, every home in Edmonton is being forced to change into these AMI meters that literally say "Made in Israel" right on them. It's a lot of stress for Palestinian families who, to have something that says "Made in Israel" in your home, and there's no other option, and the only other option that they have given is American-made meters, but you have to pay to opt out of these AMI meters. So basically, Palestinian families are being forced to pay to boycott an Israeli-made meter. And as Anna said, $10 is making a difference in Gaza right now. So if I'm to pay $25 a month to opt out of this like horrible failure of sourcing these meters on EPCOR's part, from apartheid land and from stolen land in the West Bank, it's these apartheid complicit companies and water apartheid complicit specifically. In what world is that ethical? And it violates your own ethical standards. So please learn more about that campaign because they're doing a lot of good work on it. And basically pay attention. I think outside of the mutual aid, outside of continuing to disrupt, outside of all of that, learn as much as possible, educate yourself, pay attention to who is complicit in the death and genocide of Palestinian people, and how we can push against that from here. Because there's a lot of ways we can push against it from here. We can push against it, as we've seen over the past 15 months, with disrupting arms shipments, with disrupting Indigo and their complicity with Heather Reisman and the Heseg Fund. We can disrupt it with trying to get all of these charitable status, awful funds that are also causing more land grabs and more ethnic cleansing in Palestine, defunded and not defunded, but at least losing their charitable status and kind of making people understand what is happening through their own tax dollars. Look at your financial institutions. Look at Scotiabank and how they're still very complicit. All of the financial institutions are complicit, but some more than others. And then take a look at the wins that we've achieved over as a movement over the last 15 months with having Elbit take away 50% of their investments and keep pushing for those things. And I think the more that we identify what needs to be pushed back against from here, from Turtle Island, I think that's what we need to focus on, how we can make changes here that not only benefit Palestinians in Palestine, that also push back against colonial structures everywhere.
Just making a note there, I'm going to link in the show notes a few of those victories so folks can read about the Indigo stores closing and some of the charitable statuses already being removed, just to kind of give credence to your answer there. But I love your example, your local example of EPCOR Delivers Genocide, because to me that says to all of the companies out there is nobody off limits. If you thought folks were just going to focus on arms manufacturers and adjacent, you were wrong. Water meters is on the list. Bookstores are on the list. It's endless. Like, people are really doing the digging that's needed to eat away at the Zionist state, bit by bit, right? Company by company. And to hear those local examples too, it inspires me. It must inspire the audience too, to know that so many angles are being explored. Like you said, legal, disruptive, educational, it's endless. It's endless. I try to tell as many of these stories as possible, but I know I'm missing some too. So if people out there have any more of these stories of resistance, please always send them my way. I would love to amplify anything like that. So Fatima, for sure, I'm going to link people to that and boost it as much as I can, as I do all the work that I see from you folks. I'm so grateful for you taking time to unpack this with me. Quite often it's selfish. I have the need to better understand something, or sometimes even feel validated to hear you say it's okay to celebrate. It's also okay to not know where we're going at the moment, but to know that we have to keep going and all of that. So I very much appreciate that, and the work that you do on the ground. Thank you for joining us again. Let's wrap up this episode of Blueprints of Disruption with more sounds of Palestinians returning to the north of Gaza, and a reminder that the work is still not done. Check out the show notes for ways that you can take action right now. Until next time, keep disrupting.